Thank you so much. This has been incredible. I feel that this is exactly where I want to be. I mean, like, I can't imagine more exciting ideas and trajectories to talk about. And I think that we all just got a glimpse into the future. And these are some extraordinary trajectories in technology that are going to remake the world as we know it. But it's worth saying that this summit is coming at a kind of a perplexing time in the history of technology, because the big question is, how is AI going to transform all of these areas of innovation? And as we all know, there is this kind of cognitive dissonance in terms of the stories that we're hearing about AI. Is it, on the one hand, this radical technology that's going to upend the world as we know it in these troubling and exciting ways? Or is it, as we keep on hearing about, is it our LLMs hitting a wall, our businesses incapable of leveraging it to any actually productive extent, and is it a bubble? So I can imagine that for people who are building careers in the technology field or in the tech adjacent field, as I imagine many of you are, this cognitive dissonance can be a little bit perplexing. And I think it comes down to a question of trend lines, which I think are fairly obvious at this point. I mean, we see where things are going, but it's the timelines where things get dicey. And if you're making a bet on pinning your career to a kind of technological trajectory, you don't really want to pin it to something where the product market fit is going to endlessly recede into the future. So I think now it might be really interesting to talk a little bit about these trajectories and then drill down into the timelines. And so, Megan, your presentation was totally fascinating. It reminds me that back in 2001, and I'm dating myself here, but Dean Kamen really stirred up all this speculation around the world where he was releasing the Segway. And amazing people, I mean, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs both said that this is going to revolutionize the world. Cities are going to be rebuilt around this technology. And then it was a scooter, and it didn't really happen at that point. But now, self-driving cars seem like they're poised to actually remake cities. And I wonder, you were talking about the kind of industries that can arise around, inside the kind of the Waymo ecosystem. Can you talk a little bit about how you see like the broader kind of infrastructure of cities starting to change and shift as these kinds of cars get rolled out?
Sure. I think it's hard still. It's still early to the trajectories point. Like, I think cities have been talking. I mean, you can go back to like Futurama was talking about self-driving cars, and that's now been threefolds right over. So, and cities have been talking about sustainability and like rethinking their mobility kind of whole framework so that they're less car-centric for, again, decades. And just now do you start to see that very unevenly distributed, frankly, but like in different cities all over the world. So you see in Austin, for example, they've invested significantly in bike lane infrastructure, right? And so like that took, I don't know, tons of policy work to make happen. But now when you go to Austin, you can see like 2-lane, or double directional bike lanes, taking over like what were previously traffic lanes and parking lanes. And so you do see, when you start looking closely, like fairly major shifts, right, in like how land use is being done and which modes of transportation they're prioritizing. And so it is something where I think it's happening, right? But right now it's still really happening for bikes and for pedestrians and for basically just like non-personal owned car-based mobility. And I think it will take a while for us to all have autonomous vehicles to the point where we can say, oh, now we should start planning policy around this, and we should start rethinking land use in a way that, autonomous is helping with. So I think it's happening. It's slow, and it's not everywhere. And, Pittsburgh is a very complicated transportation space, and so you might not see it every day here, but it is happening.
So you said a future in which we all have autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
Now, is that the kind of future that we can predict coming to fruition, or is it a world where we all use autonomous vehicles? Are we going to have them, or are we going to is that kind of slippage going to start to play out?
This is a debate I'm having with my 8-year-old and 10-year-old right now, because I don't really want them to be teenage drivers. My experience as a teenage driver wasn't super safe, and I had a fair number of family-related friends not survive their teenage years through driving. So I'm like, well, one day you don't have to learn to drive. You guys can just take Waymo. And they're like, Mom, we are not taking Waymo everywhere we go. They're just like, so there's a real question about like, is this supplemental? Is this fully replacing? Can you start to imagine a world where you really don't buy a car? And again, it's like, it depends on where you live and how you live, right? So there's already plenty of people all over the world that don't own cars and live in very dense urban environments. And this can become completely replacing other modes of transportation. But if they live in Japan, where there's an amazing train infrastructure, it will always be supplemental to that, right? But if you don't have that infrastructure, maybe you don't have to build it. So there's a lot of like, depends, right? In terms of like how much or how frequently people use it. My kids are totally determined that they need to learn how to drive, which I think is very interesting. But
in case there's some kind of Mad Max kind of situation where,
driving's a rite of passage.
yeah, no, they're like, it's powerful, Mom. I'm like, okay, well, it's not safe.
One thing that I learned in talking to you ahead of this conference, that I'm not sure if it's as widely known as it should be, but that Waymo is not really about the car, it's about the technology that operates the car. Kind of almost like the Android operating system isn't only about the Pixel, but it's used by all these other these companies. And I wonder, I mean, in this broader kind of world of opportunity for innovation and product build out that has to happen, what does this kind of interconnected entire industry look like? What's the scope of it, do you think?
I do think that transportation is a huge industry, right? And so it's literally rethinking, this sounds very big, but it's rethinking transportation as an industry and all of the sub-elements of that. And you've seen that happen a little bit in delivery, right? I mean, just like looking at retail, how retail's changed, how warehousing's changed, how shipping's changed. And if you look at it over a 20-year horizon, it's changed pretty fundamentally, right? In terms of like how goods get to people and how many touch points there are or aren't. And so I do think, and there's new players and there's new startups and it's similar, right? And like you basically have to reimagine who owns the thing, like the car, right? So if it's not Waymo, who is that? And then who services it, who runs it, who cleans it, and it could be individuals, it could be small companies, it could be big companies. So I do think that when you imagine transportation in the future, there may just be a very different set of players altogether, which you have seen. Like I do think there are industries that have gone through that level of transformation. It just takes a lot of time.
So when I hear that, I think on behalf of all the graphic designers in the audience about all the signs that need to be made and all of the new kind of, just as you were talking about, these cues about how the car is thinking through its operations. It's like in a world of graphic design that needs to be invented, and that's pretty exciting. So Nick, speaking of these nascent kind of entire industries that are coming into being, wearables, especially like AR, VR headsets and glasses have kind of been that future that has always been on the cusp of being here. I mean, there have been amazing devices that have been available since, the 70s and 80s, but it's the cost that has really had to come down. And it seems that we're on the cusp of finally getting to this like kind of mass accessible wearable device. And I know, spoiler alert, maybe I can say this, I don't think you can talk about it, but there are reports that Meta Connect next week is going to be unveiling a new kind of wearable, like a glasses that's going to have a heads-up display, a haptic control wristband that will be a first kind of foray, apparently in the price range of an iPhone, into this kind of like wearables AR paradigm, which, I mean, conceptually speaking, is fascinating. So what do you think this, how do you think this is going to start to roll out? Is it going to become, is 2026 going to be the year that we start seeing more and more people wearing these things and interfacing with them? And like, what kind of developer, ecosystem needs to pop up around something like that?
Great question. AR, VR, it's been around for a long time. And I think now we're starting to get to a point where you kind of have three things happening at the same time. Like the hardware is turning into a form factor that's more acceptable for the masses. You've got price that's starting to come down, just the cost of the technology. So it increases the size of your addressable market in terms of just being able to cater to a larger audience. And then you've got the inclusion of AI, which is going to help enable more of the everyday experiences that people can have. And when those things all come together and you've got the right products in place, then now you'll start to see a flywheel happen of more product adoption. And I think we're still in the product adoption life cycle. We're trying to cross the chasm right now. And I think for VR, it started with who's the beachhead target? It's gaming. How do we start to stretch beyond that? And developers are going to play a key role in that, right? So you've got from training. I sat in on some classes yesterday of how teams are using VR. I'm looking at you in the back to teach how to weld and potter. It's really fascinating. I got to work with Josh in Deep Local a few years ago, and we were trying to bring live sports to fans. So one of the stat lines is that less than 1% of people will ever sit courtside at an NBA game. But what if you could bring that experience to fans at the comfort of their home, sitting on their couch and putting on a VR device and watching live entertainment? So I think you're going to have an influx of content providers, streaming partners, sports providers that are going to give these opportunities for people to enjoy. Also, something that I love, like fitness and wellness. So for, whether you're a parent and you don't have a lot of time to make it to the gym, you can put on your Quest headset. Now you have a gym in your living room, right? In an 8x8 space, you can get all the workouts that you need. So you're going to need developers to do that. And you're going to need a lot of creators as well. So I think it's just only going to continue to take shape as time goes.
I mean, one thing that I find so exciting about this future is that the idea of unlocking difficult subjects by using AI to to be a kind of a co-pilot with you as you're looking at something. Say you're in a museum and there's an artwork that maybe is not so perfectly labeled or that is incredibly confusing, that you can have, you can be looking at it together and be talking it through and maybe have some kind of heads-up display, simple information about it, that the possibility of understanding complexity out in the world might start to get easier in the way that understanding complexity at our laptops has gotten so much easier with AI. I mean, it's like the easiest way to learn about complicated subjects that I think that I've ever experienced. But the idea that this can start to fan out into the physical world is pretty mind-blowing. And I mean, is that something like this kind of ride along AI that is your companion as you're walking around? Is that something that is part of this kind of longer term?
I use it all the time.
Yeah.
I don't have a green thumb, but I try to have one. So got a lot of plants and they die very quickly. So I'm using my glasses and I'm like, hey, Meta, tell me what's wrong with this plant. How can I save it? Or what kind of plant is this? And what should the watering schedule be? Very just practical use cases that come in handy. I also love wine, and if I'm at a wine shop and I'm seeing a bottle that I don't recognize, I'm like, hey, Meta, tell me about this bottle. Oh, it's this grape from this region. Okay, well, what types of wines come from that region? It comes in handy all the time, and I think that's the fun piece. I think over time, you're also going to start to have more blending of physical and digital environments coming together. I think part of why metaverse wasn't resonating with a lot of people is that this sense of escapism, this sense of like, it's too immersive and I'm not ready for that. And some people are, and some people get really excited about that. But when you can start to just experience that, you can visualize the room and start to see the digital elements interacting in a way that's more palatable. I think it gets a lot more people willing to accept what the technology is and kind of pique their interest and consider it.
I mean, you were talking about how when you joined, it was like the metaverse moment, and that didn't seem to catch fire at the time, again, because of these timelines. Like, the trajectories are clear, and I'm sure that internally it was very clear that this is definitely an inevitable bet, that we're going to be in an increasingly digital world in terms of the way we live our lives and consume our, and buy products, et cetera. But nowadays, if like you have the right price point, and if the use cases are evident enough, and these devices start to spread around, then boom, metaverse. Hey, it happened. Surprise! Like you were talking about these kinds of physical, digital hybrid spaces. Can you talk a little bit more about like what kinds of like, are you envisioning kind of sporting events, or are you envisioning what could some of these spaces look like?
Yeah, and I try not to get hung up on the word metaverse because it's just a word. At the end of the day, people are spending a lot of money, time, and honestly creativity in digital environments, and so that innovation is just going to continue to happen, whether we want to call it the metaverse or what have you. And for me, something that I'm personally excited about as someone who didn't grow up with a lot, like it's the accessibility for me. It's for me to be able to understand and experience a different environment that I might not have the resources or the money to go travel to or to be able to access. And I think being able to bring that to the masses is a really exciting thing. And then in terms of wearables and AI, it's like, well, so many people already wear glasses, and it's just trying to make human interactions more simplified. So a lot of times people are like, I don't want to introduce new technology, but in a lot of ways, we're actually trying to like remove layers of technology from you. So create more instances where you don't have to pull out your phone. Right? Create more instances where you don't have to stare at your screen because you can unlock more capabilities hands-free. Those are the things that I'm excited about. It's about being human and bringing that and showing people how that can come to life.
I almost wonder if there's going to be some kind of design need in the same way that, we know about how the Waymos are kind of like, navigating their streets, if you'll have to have different colors, indicating what kind of like recording is happening at the time. Or
oh yeah, safety is big.
Yeah, that to get that acceptance. But so Sana, the wearables and self-driving cars are things that a lot of us are pretty, soon going to be experiencing in our daily lives. Space is not. Space is something that is almost as hard to grasp as it is far away in terms of like the practical applications for the masses. And you had this really interesting line where you said that you like to think about space as a horizontal, not a vertical. Can you talk about what that means?
Yeah. For sure. I think for us at Aurelia, we are very, very invested in space for the benefit of Earth specifically. And I think there is growing movement in the space industry to not consider it as a single vertical of things to do, businesses to support, but as a horizontal platform that a lot of things can benefit from. And now there's historical, precedent for this, communications, GPS. We've been leveraging space for a variety of different things that enable a tremendous amount in society, let alone the sort of technical innovations it took to get there. But we hope and we believe that with a little bit more real estate and a little bit more resource to getting things up and then back in orbit, we might be able to leverage microgravity as a medium for things like creation, manufacturing, production. These days, up mass, so how much mass we can carry to space is sort of the enemy. It's really expensive and really hard to get things to space. You have to be really careful with them. But we're starting to see examples and use cases of things you might be able to develop in orbit for the benefit of Earth, whether or not you're bringing down the knowledge you've learned or maybe small samples. An example of a company that we've worked with and learned from is called Lambda Vision. They are working on designing artificial retinas to cure a form of eye disease. And these grow significantly better in microgravity environments. And so the value prop they are testing right now is, can we leverage microgravity as a medium in order to help health on Earth? And that is the thing they are prototyping and building towards. It's those kinds of things that make me excited about space more as a horizontal than a vertical, figuring out, okay, if we provide the platforms, the interoperable spaces that allow people to do novel research, test out ideas, maybe work on things that aren't science, There's been a lot of talk of filming and creativity in space, art and artistic endeavor, sort of cultural meeting, the value of the overview effect as a whole in terms of bringing people together. If that becomes more accessible, there's a lot we can do. And so it's worth sort of building towards the making that point reachable.
I mean, one thing that makes me think about is that, AI is something that none of us actually, touches directly. Mm-hmm. We use these interfaces that these large superscalers like OpenAI, they give us these context windows in which we can like reach through it and like have this almost like genie in a lamp encounter with the underlying technology. It's not very designed on top of it, but we're able to tap into that thing. I mean, is there like a world in which space becomes something like that we're able to use some kind of interface to somehow experiment creatively in space or to do experiments in space? Or is that the kind of way that is going to, like, the stars come down to Earth kind of situation?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an avenue. We have our sort of tertiary benefits and effects. We have the sort of platforms and technologies that space supports, but maybe there is direct connection and communication with things going on in orbit. Honestly, from a current day perspective, space is much more accessible than it used to be. Maybe I selfishly say as a user researcher, we are now allowed to use Instagram in space. That was not a given. I think the first tweet in space was not that long ago. Space is becoming more visible and more accessible as more people with different motives and different ideas and different backgrounds all start having a seat at the table to play. It's a little bit of the Wild West out there. It's kind of wild to see what people are doing and why they're doing it. But we do have connections back and forth. And I think the hope is that we do actually start also seeing more people in orbit who don't need to be career astronauts in order to derive benefit, whether or not they are supporting a space-driven ecosystem or are up doing their own work.
And is this an area where costs coming down are going to open up all kinds of opportunities? I mean, if we do see, some of these SpaceX kind of moonshot strategies actually start to bear fruit, it seems like the costs are going to start to come down. Mm-hmm. So what do you think 5 years away looks like in terms of the new opportunities that may be unimaginable today in terms of actually having a broader, kind of more democratized access to things like spaceflight?
Oh boy, 2025 is an interesting time to ask that question. I am personally really excited for seeing where we end up as the International Space Station is most likely decommissioned, who we love dearly, but that's likely to happen, and the next generation of most likely commercial or hybrid space stations are built. There is something called the Race for Commercial Low Earth Orbit that's occurring right now. A whole bunch of private companies, in addition to sort of government agencies, are looking into, okay, what do we put in orbit? How do we leverage this resource? How do we support a diversity of work? How do we support a diversity of nations as well as, non-nation actors, which there are more now. I think having all these new seats at the table, particularly from the commercial space agencies or commercial space industry, means that, in 5-10 years, we're going to have to start seeing changes in the ways in which the public and private sector collaborate to build new things in space. And with that, I think, comes opportunity for doors to open for the rest of us who aren't going through the traditional channels of NASA or the other agencies to do work in space.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. And I don't know if you see this QR code up here. Everybody can type a question into this, using the QR code. It's going to come up on my phone, and I will try to faithfully ask those questions. In my experience, tech always glitches, but hopefully this time it will not. So when it comes to the quantum question, you were talking about this interface that people can already use through open source to use quantum computing. Now, how useful is quantum computing at this stage? And as these huge investments are made into building out these new facilities, on this Chicago South Side, there's this whole new, Psi Quantum, IBM facility that is launching there. There's always been this 10 years out horizon line where they say, it's going to be usable 10 years from now, but this has been going on for decades.
Yeah.
So what is your prognosis on, what is the utility of quantum today for any practical application?
Yeah.
And what is your prognosis of when that's going to start to be more meaningful commercially?
Oof, fantastic questions. And I will preface with 2 caveats. One, I am no prognosticator. I have 2 humanities degrees, though I dabble in the sciences in my spare time. The second, I think, is that I think the exciting thing is I think my knowledge is already a little out of date. I try to keep abreast, but I've been in space for a couple of years now. And the joy of seeing something I worked on a couple years ago grow vastly beyond what I had imagined might be possible in that time gives me hope in that more optimistic purview of what we're building. But I think the question of value prop and utility continues to be the case in sort of basic to translational to applied scientific research. For quantum computing, there are lots of types of problems that quantum computers might be really valuable to solve that have direct applications in spaces like banking and material science and chemistry, to name just a couple. And folks are very hard at work, both working on demonstrating the value prop of these technologies, and you'll see various claims to varying degrees of fidelity, working on the hardware, so figuring out which quantum bits or qubits are going to be the most stable and successful to leverage, as well as working on the software, the platform, which was the bit I was very lucky to contribute to. How are we going to interface with these technologies, describe what we want out of them, and get something of value back? And so there is sort of parallel innovation happening in all of those spheres, and I'm not entirely sure what the limiter is right now, or if we are just sort of trudging toward or moving ahead along each of those veins. It's an unsatisfying answer, but there's a lot of very interesting stuff happening, and I think we are in the messy middle.
So should students here dive into quantum and say, I'm going to design, for my quantum app in the future?
Look, a quantum computer is not going to replace your phone. That's worth saying aloud. But I think the way I've answered this question in the past is sort of visible in the way I've approached my career, which is I'm not necessarily taking big bets on any individual technology. I'm trying to figure out where is my skill set valuable and taking this thing that's esoteric and unknowable and complex and turning it into something that people can engage with, that they can run experiments on, that they can play with. Much to sort of the marketing approach that you were describing, Nick, in terms of, hey, we're going to put this out there in people's hands and we're going to trust folks to come back to us and learn from them as well. I think that iterative cycle is so valuable in R&D and emerging tech. And it's the kind of work I really, really like to enable across platforms. And I think that's work all of us can contribute to in varying ways.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try to ask some some student questions. The app keeps on jumping around, but I'm going to make it work. And one of them was for you, Megan, and that is, what is a day in the life of a of Megan Neese look like at Waymo?
All right. And this might resonate. Working in tech is busy. So the boring answer is I take 16 30-minute meetings a day and answer 400 emails. And the fun answer is that we are running, so I run a team, and there's teams working on the app, there's teams working on the in-vehicle experience, there's teams working on sound design, there's teams working on operational tooling and process, there's teams working on launches in different markets, there's teams working. So at all times, there's like 2 or 3 studies in field, which means like out in the building, interviewing people, shadowing jobs. And my biggest challenge always is getting engineers and executives and like very busy folks who also have at least 16 30-minute meetings a day to stop and to come outside with us. Like, come just 4 hours. I know 4 hours is an insane amount of time, but it's going to be fun. We're going to have lunch. You're going to meet some riders. You're going to like just do this with me. And that is, I think, where people really, it changes their work, right? Because they can feel the product, they can see the needs, they can ask questions. It becomes real in a way that any version of any tool that we make in simulation, it does not. Like, they can sit there and watch San Francisco through this black environment for days on end, and coming out for 4 hours changes how they feel about working at Waymo. So a big part of my job is just like literally trying to convince people to stop having meetings and like come talk to users. And it's fun and really busy and moving very quickly, like everything. And so that's what I do.
And how do you get to work in the morning?
Well, we're still remote. We are the pandemic. Waymo doubled in size during the pandemic, and we never bought more real estate because we're like, why? And so we have buildings that we go to for certain meetings. Like if you're doing a workshop or you're doing something where like you need face-to-face, you show up. But yeah, so I'm like mostly like in and out of like, home. But yeah, we take Waymo. My kids know the drill, like how to take Waymo. But basically some combination of me driving, taking Waymo, walking, staying at home. Yeah.
That sounds like one of those great famous Google perks of having, having
being
an
able
autonomous
to,
car.
Yeah. We can, so I can take Waymo up and down from Silicon Valley to the city and take meetings along the way. And so, yeah, I'll spend a lot of time just riding, in Waymo. Yeah.
So here's a great question for you, Nick. What is the best approach to introduce new technologies to heritage brands?
Well, the answer that no one wants to hear is it depends. It depends on it depends on the brand. It depends on the technology. I think at Gatorade, when talking about the sweat patch, that was an athlete wearable that no one had ever heard of before. So what was really important was for us to validate. And again, we're leaning on our backed by science moniker. So like we had to be in the field. I was traveling literally around the world. We were with the Dallas Cowboys, with the New York Knicks. We were doing sweat. I mean, I lived and breathed sweat, which doesn't sound that interesting. And I think once you start to do that, for Gatorade at least, like we're used by the pros. So you seed the innovation with the athletes. You let them wear it and use it first. So when we launched the GX bottles, we started with NFL sidelines because the TV exposure that you get, we can measure the certain amount of impressions that will get any NFL game. And so you know that if you're going to associate your product with the most elite athletes in the world, as you start to launch new innovation, whether that's a new subline of hydration, whether that's a new protein bar, or whether that's all new wearable and digital app to accompany it, people are going to have inherent trust because they know the best of the best are using it. And I think there's a lot of times where celebrities will back certain brands and it looks like a money grab. But when you're seeing celebrities competing at the highest level, consuming your product, it's pretty believable. I won't tell you that in a lot of those Gatorade coolers on the sidelines could be water. I won't say that, but the pros still use it. So I think it's a case by case basis in terms of how you launch new innovation with a heritage brand.
I mean, it's one of the most daunting things I'm imagining, because like the heritage brand has everything to lose by putting out a product that is not to its level.
Well, yeah, for a lot of brands, you start to bake in this strong association with one thing. So when you're trying to branch out of it, people are like, what are you doing? I only know you and use you for this thing. I don't need you for this thing. So that's where you really have to drive credibility. And as a marketer, it's just absolutely important that you understand what the human unmet need is. And I think a lot of times when we launch new products and new innovations, we launch a solution before we've identified the problem. And that's a trap that we always fall into. And then I have to retroactively manufacture a problem and convince you that that's your problem and why you need this thing. So when we start to think about what the problem we're trying to solve and then build the solution around that as designers, as creators, this is very important. I think if you follow that life cycle, I think you're going to have a lot smoother adoption for consumers.
So, Sana, as a researcher, how involved are you in the product development cycle?
That is an interesting question. And I think it depends on sort of which of my past lives we're describing. At Watson Health and IBM Quantum, was very, very involved. I effectively held sort of hybrid research to content and high-level UX roles, mainly to make sure that our intentions stayed aligned. And so my goal was, as a researcher, to synthesize and share North Star vision, and then to build out at least one potential scaffold for what that might look like that talented UX, UI, visual and interaction designers could take from me and build out to even greater things. Space is a little bit different because I wouldn't necessarily describe what we do as a product development cycle. We're a nonprofit with a pretty long time horizon. We're thinking about 15 to 30 years out in terms of our tech. So not the next race for commercial low Earth orbit, but maybe the one after that. And so a lot of what we are doing is bread and butter R&D and that sort of iterative design cycle that helps us figure out what we should be building, why we should be building it, and for whom. So there's a lot of talk around early adopters, analogs, sort of spaces that we can learn from when trying to create net new technology. But that has a little bit of a different feel and a little bit of a different cadence to, I'd say, traditional product development, which I'm a little bit more used to in my previous lives. It's a lot more messy and a lot more uncertain, and you're often building problems and solutions at the same time, again, much to y'all's points. And so that can be a very ambiguous, messy space to play in, and I think requires a little bit of tolerance of ambiguity to play comfortably there.
So here's a question that I think is interestingly suited to you, Megan. Can you talk about how building trust between the design and product teams and the science teams is critical to success, and how to do that?
I forget exactly earlier today, you were talking about ratios when the IBM was hiring in ratios. It's this endless conversation about basically how do you hire in cross-functional teams, right? So this has been, it seems very simple. We need an engineer, we need a designer, we need a researcher, but like in every job I've ever had, that's never the way it's set up. Like, it's always like there's like 10 times as many engineers and there's like one designer like scrambling to try to like make, or there's like 5 designers and like 2 engineers and you're like, wait, we need to like build this out. So like, it's getting the ratios right is like an endless kind of leadership advocacy problem of like trying to either adjust for or hire in a better way so that you literally have cross-functional teams. And those cross-functional teams can then work together because it's, for whatever reason, it's, at least in my view, it's just very rare. It's very rare to walk into a company and have beautifully curated cross-functional teams put on each problem in a way that you might imagine would be the most effective way to run a company. And so it's always about either advocating for, like, so if you're over-resourced, like there's more design than whatever the other thing, it's like trying to find, advocating for the power that design can play in these other areas, right? So like when you were talking about legacy companies, like a lot of my previous roles at older car companies was like convincing them about the future. Like, no, you really, electrification is going to matter, and they're like, but no one's buying, electric cars. Like, why should we care about this? And it was just like trying to bring forward the future to folks that really resisted change. And it was an advocacy role. Like I was trying to explain the future and trying to inspire people and trying to bring design into business conversations or into engineering conversations. And like, it was just always trying to like crack the door with like either curious questions or like interesting new nuggets. Like it was always like, what new thing can I teach them today that will make them be like, oh, this seems useful, like come in more. And then in other jobs, it's like the opposite where they know the value, right? But there's just way too few. And so then you're just trying to like prioritize of the 56 project requests, which 4, can we do? And how do you still help everyone at least get a little bit of like insight infused into what they're doing? And so it's just changes. I think to me, it just changes depending on what situation you're in, like whatever job you walk into and like what the situation is, then how do you build trust? So you're either trying to kind of like spread yourself super thin, or you're trying to like inject yourself when they're like, what do you do? So it's like, it's always a little bit of a balance, but I think you just adapt, people are interesting and their problems are fun. And so if you can meet people and ask good questions and, help them think, it goes well. I don't know. Like you can build trust kind of anywhere, I think.
I thought that what you said about designers being advocates for human beings was really interesting, because theoretically, when you're in a company, everybody you're working with is a human being. But is that like a well-known kind of formulation for, how designers operate in a company?
I think so. I think maybe I'll talk about this from a space perspective. It has been a fascinating exercise to bring design to space contexts and have people guess what they think I do for a living as a result. Because design is a word that can mean many things. And so everything from communications and brand and marketing, which I do at my teeny company, though, man, we have a new communications officer and it's amazing. She does her job so much better than I ever could. You have product and requirements. You have human factors or human systems integration, which sort of sits in the HCI space. You have architecture, you have human-centered design. There's I'm preaching to the choir here. There are a lot of different ways to practice in this room. The ways I like to talk about it often centers around sort of how you see yourself. So some folks sort of treat design as process, and this is sort of the evangelized design thinking method, right? You have a set of activities or toolkits that you can pull from. This has been leveraged a lot in the past 20 years or so. You have design as craft, so you have taste, you have vision, you're able to articulate and execute on things in a way that other people just can't. Then you have design as intention or advocacy, where you are, again, the person who represents people in your org. Theoretically, we should all be doing that. That's a thing we should be doing. But design is uniquely positioned, given how we learn about the world, to be advocates for people and also to be advocates for intentional decision making. Is the thing that we're doing the thing we're supposed to be doing, or have we invented a solution to a problem that does not exist? I'd say the last one that I'd love to see everyone here sort of buy into at least a little bit, because it would make the world a better place, is design as service. Anna touched upon this in her opening remarks. Again, it's a unique skill set to have in the world, where you're able to learn from other people and then come with creative and clever ways to make the world a better place. And I think that's a tremendous motivator when it comes to doing the right work well.
Yeah, it's important work that the people in this school are striving towards. And here's a student question for you, which is, you mentioned your failures, which is very refreshing. how do you deal with failure without becoming demotivated? And how do you, and I'll embellish it by, and how do you make it so funny? I mean, that was very.
I can laugh about it now. I just blamed it on the fact that I was new, and I was like, it's okay, I'm just learning. No. That was a tough one because we spent a year and a half. I was working with R&D. They were doing the product testing. We were trying to decide how we were going to launch it, what's the go-to-market strategy, where we're going to sell the product, how we're going to package the product, what's the communication hierarchy on the packaging. There's a lot that goes into the idea of what the product could be, developing the product, proving it out, and then getting it on shelf. Like it is mind-blowing, the process. Like when you walk up and down the store aisles and you just see a box of cereal on the shelf, to know what went into getting that box of Wheaties on that shelf, it's crazy to see the backside of it. So when you spend so much time on something, it naturally is going to feel defeating, but at the same time, we didn't put all of our eggs in that basket, right? So consumer research told us that people will get really jazzed up about customizing how they consume their protein. So they want protein powder options. They want to have a quick on-the-go shake because sometimes a liquid form of consumption is more convenient than a bar, which can dry out your mouth. So we already had feelers out for trying to break into other molds in terms of growing the protein business. So you just got to take it and run with it. And I think my boss said at the time, you're going to look at this and laugh, and she was right. Yeah. But last very important point is that we're all going to fail. We all have failed, and we will all continue to fail. You learn most from your failures, so never forget that.
So here's one question that is asked a few times in different variations, which is, what are you most excited about in terms of the technology that you're engaging with, and what are you most terrified by about it? And Megan, maybe start with you.
I'm excited about the fact that, well, I guess I'm excited to work in a field of technology that is able to move so fast. Like it is, I know it's hard to, everyone says it, but it is the first job that I've had where it feels like the momentum of the company is like faster than the company can operate at, right? So the cool part of the job is that like you're allowed to run as fast as you can. Like they're just like, oh yeah, here, give him this, go. And then everyone's running as fast as they can. And that's the limiting factor, right? Whereas like a lot of other jobs I've had, it's like there's all sorts of other limiting factors about governance or hierarchy or politics or like all these things that like become you become encumbered with to make it really hard. So to me, it's like being able to work on something that you're just trying to catch up with the tech, like stay like relevant with the edge of where that is super exciting and inspiring because all sorts of like little things become possible. And it's a way of solving problems that I've never before thought of as a designer. So like, stupid example, people leave stuff in Waymos all the time and there's no driver to like tell you forgot your phone. And so, like the very first design brainstorms were like, oh, well, like let's pop up a reminder. And so there's like a little thing that the audio is like, as you're exiting your Waymo, don't forget to check your stuff. And there's like a little illustration, and then like the next writer could come in and like press a button and like say there's some, someone left their stuff, and then it reports it back. And then it's like we're talking to the engineering team, and they're like, oh, well, we have these computer vision models, so we can like take a photo of the car before the person gets in and take a photo of the car after the person gets in, and then like identify the probable presence of a phone and then send an audio alert. So then it changed the entire design opportunity. So we're like, oh, sweet. So now you can, if you leave your phone in a Waymo, it will detect it. And then there's an audio alert, like a speaker outside of the car that will say, come back. And you will like run back and open the door and like get your phone. And like, that's the kind of thing that's like, I don't know, we're still so 2D sometimes, like the way that we were thinking about the whole problem was like how through the screen and through messaging, and do we do this? And then there's these you're like, oh, sweet, that's right. We can like visually identify objects with cameras now, super reliably, So I don't know. It's fun.
And what about the scary part?
Oh, I don't know. I had this experience because when I first started at Waymo, we were based out of the Google X building, and the Google X building is just like this, space with all sorts of wild things happening. And I remember kind of being like, having a little bit of the like robot overlord fears. And I'll never forget, the Google Brain team has these arms that all day long slowly pick up trash. They just like, they're trying to articulate the whole concept of it. And if you ever want to like not worry, just stand there for 15 minutes and watch robots try to pick things up. Because it's really not working all the time. And so for whatever reason, that I just was like, we're fine. Like, it's like, like, it'll be fine. Yeah.
That does make me think, like, one thing from your really cool, inspiring video at the end, about how all of this, like, all of the video and information's gathered by these fleets of Waymos is nourishing these world models that are going to have this application in robotics. Is amazing how vertically integrated the whole Google thing is.
Yeah, well, that's how it drives. I mean, so the driving is all based on driving. I mean, it is all AI. So it's like thousands and thousands and thousands of, human miles driven, brought into the systems, then understood. So there's been all these like little examples of like being able to make non-robotic turns. So like there's some, 10 years ago when I was taking these rides in like pre-autonomous cars, you would turn. It's like the car. So being able to smooth out a turn so that it feels super consistent with how you drive was just based on data, like looking at driving data for thousands and thousands and thousands of drivers, and then amalgamating that and like teaching the system how to drive. So like all of that is based on, teaching, learning. Like the whole system is continuously getting smarter and better because it's watching everyone else drive. It's watching, it's like silly data. 35% of people that we've seen in our systems speed. Everyone speeds all the time. Not everyone, 35%. But like, so it's like this kind of thing. Then now that you know that, you can change and adapt the driver to an environment that assumes that the speed limits will not be adhered to in the way that policymakers might intend. And so then that makes the whole system a little bit smarter. It's generative, yeah.
So, same exciting and scary question for you.
I think I'm fortunate enough to work for a company that is fundamentally coming up with solutions that impact how we all live, breathe, work, and communicate. And as a storyteller, being able to take a piece of technology and make it relevant for people is really exciting and what I get jazzed up about, because everyone has something that makes them tick. A piece of technology is going to excite someone for this feature, someone else for a different feature. She was dancing to Montel Jordan, this is how we do it. She got excited about that. I do a demo for someone else, they're going to be excited about the photo capture. But in all seriousness, like that storytelling element is just something that I will always love, whether I'm working for a technology company or I'm working and I'm making more protein bars in the future. What's the second part?
Scary.
We should continue to make solutions that matter, and not just build for the sake of building, race for the sake of racing, compete for the sake of competing so that we can be on top. And always just think with, fundamental human needs and what people need. And if we lose sight of that, that can be scary. I'm not saying we are, that we have, but the idea of losing sight of that is scary.
Same exciting and scary question to you.
I think in space, at least, the thing that excites me most is the the new people who are going to space right now, I think since the year 2000, we've had effectively space tourists, and they're still a rarefied bunch for sure. But it means that we've seen the youngest and oldest person in space change rapidly in terms of decades. I think we sent a 19-year-old, we sent an 85-year-old. What that means is that with these new folks coming up, accessibility and inclusivity become a need and not a nice to have. And I think that is huge for environmental design, for space and other environments in orbit. I really want to see a time where space is not just limited to the most exceptional of us, but to everyone in terms of how we design and build for it. On the flip side, I think the thing that makes me the most nervous is because we are in a very new and evolving era of who gets to participate in human spaceflight and how and why, that we do run the risk of running into the opposite problem where space becomes for the benefit of only a few. It's something that at Aurelia we care about as a nonprofit. We've been sort of making our way into policy step by step, trying to figure out how we're good actors or stewards of the space commons. But I think it is a gargantuan effort to organize essentially a worldwide method of leveraging this resource that we have, or essentially just everything, including the Earth, its atmosphere, and beyond in a way that feels responsible.
That's a great note to end on. Responsibility. Thank you very much, everybody. It's great.